2, 1.
Welcome. The year is 2006, and I was going through a big cultural shock in my life as I had just moved to the UK for my law studies, for my law degree. So the life plan back in the day was to become a lawyer. I couldn't enter the law school in Greece, so I finished politics and IR in Greece, and here I am in the UK, somewhere in the countryside, first time away from Greece, and first time in a different educational system. And everything needed to happen very quickly, and I had to adjust myself to this system very quickly because I had the direct entry in the second year, which means no introductory stuff. So quite quickly, I had to adjust to what the English educational system wanted from me. And one of the shocks, for example, was that in the UK, students needed to have an email. In Greece back then, it was considered completely, we've never heard of email related to university. Like you would email your professors. We were too intimidated to even stare in their eyes while they were teaching. So one of the other things that I found quite shocking in the UK is that there was such a thing as presentations, that students would write an essay or do an oral presentation. In Greece, I had 64 modules. I only had to do a presentation once. And it was a presentation, it was an essay that I wrote on European referendums. Of course, I had no idea how to write an essay. So I wrote something like a communist manifesto against the European Union. Surprise, surprise, I failed. Of course, I thought that the neoliberal professor failed me because she was a force for reaction. So my communication skills were exactly at zero. I had no idea how to talk or how to write. So then in the first week, and again, everything had to happen very quickly. In the first week, I attend this writing workshop. And there was this teacher who gave us this very simple formula on how to structure every piece of written work or of oral presentation. He said, look, it's simple. The structure is, tell them what you'll tell them, tell them what you told them. This is the universal structure that applies to everything. And you'll never forget it. It's very simple. Tell them what you tell them, tell them what you told them. Indeed, I found this very, very catchy, and I still remember it today. And while I was a student, I put this formula into work. My essays were okay. My presentations, whenever I had to do one, they were okay. So I liked this formula so much that some years later, when I was on the other side of the class, when I was teaching, I thought that this clever formula would be the best advice I would give to my students. So the context is when these days, when you're a teacher in the UK, when you're a university lecturer, you need to realize that the bar on what you can achieve is low. Because the moment you tell people there's going to be an oral presentation, you have 25% of the class showing up to you and telling you they have anxiety or they cannot do a presentation, which is okay, it is what it is. So you have to give them very simple and encouraging advice. So my go-to formula was introduction, tell them what you tell them, main part, tell them, conclusion, tell them what you told them. And actually, I gave them even examples of how this great formula works. So, for example, I gave them the formula of a love letter. So I said, whatever you read, whether it is a treatise on economics or a 5-line love letter, you will notice the same structure. So, for example, the love letter is, this is a letter in which I want to express my feelings for you. Tell them what you'll tell them. I am a lot in love with you and I want to elope with you and we will go to the North Pole. Tell them, this was a letter about my feelings. I hope you will join me. Tell them what you told them. So this was my cute way for teaching communication skills to my students. And it worked. Very few of them failed. And most of my students could deliver a presentation that would pass. The point is that within 15 years of having heard this formula, I realized it is really, really, really bad advice. So the universal formula on which I built my presentation skills and which I built my students' presentation skills is a really bad piece of advice, particularly if you want to give a presentation which is decent. And why is that? because it is completely misunderstanding the two most important parts of any piece of communication, either of a written piece of communication or an oral piece of communication, which is the opening and the closing. So today, let's see why this is horrible advice, why the vast majority of people follow such a simplistic structure and give presentations that suck, or write pieces of work that are boring. And of course, here I include myself. So let's see why the tell them what you tell them is a horrible, horrible, horrible opening. So if you think about your opening, if you think about your first lines when you talk or when you write, it is the one moment, usually brief moment, where you still have the audience's attention. Even if the audience would rather be anywhere else than stuck with you in a room, they are in that room, they have to be there with you, so they hope that you will not bore them. And usually they get disappointed within the first minute. Because what is the usual opening? Today I will talk to you about this and this. In the first part of my presentation, I will say this. In the second part of my presentation, I will say this. Then I will say, you've already lost them. So again, the attention span these days is very, 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 very short. So in the beginning, you have to make sure that somehow you motivate them to stick with you. And this is an advice that you see in any form of communication. So recently, actually these days, I'm listening in Audible in a book about copywriting. It's the ARCUK copywriting handbook by a guy who is a very famous copywriter, Joseph Sugarman. And he says that no matter what you need the copywriting for, an advertisement in a newspaper or a poster, the main target of the whole thing, of your whole copy, is to make sure that your audience is going to read the first line. Everything directs them to the first line, because if they read the first line, they might continue to the second line. But usually you might lose them already from the first line. So the opening is crucial, crucial, crucial. Or when it comes to not an ad, but let's say a talk or an article, you need to make very soon, you need to make clear what's in it for the audience. So as I've read in a book on communication by someone who put it very, very bluntly, the audience doesn't care about your ideas and the audience doesn't care about what you have to sell them. The audience cares about the question in their mind is, how is this relevant to me? So basically, when they see you, they tell you either entertain me or solve my problems. So very early in the beginning, you have to make sure that you show them how you will do one of these things. Solve their problems, entertain them, help them to sort out something, but show them that there's something in for them. Again, an introduction that says, today I will blah, 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 usually disregards the audience, and therefore it is a very, very bad, very, very bad strategy. So what you do in the beginning, anything but tell them what you'll tell them. Anything but just giving a presentation of what is to follow. And actually, I had this click when I was the victim of this. So I'm not telling you as like a snob person, oh, I know everything and you don't. I know these things because I made these mistakes. So when I started working for the Ayn Rand Institute, it's a great job, partly because every now and then we have to present in front of Yaron Brook and get feedback on our talks from Yaron himself, one of the top public speakers in the world. So he was the first one whom I heard telling us every time in the beginning this, don't tell us what is going to come. We will listen to it. Hopefully we're not going to leave the room. So make use of the time in the beginning to tell us something more exciting than what is to follow. Or let me give you the example in written form. You know how you start reading the introduction of a book, and then the last 3 pages of the introduction is an outline of all the chapters to come. Now, I don't know about you. I never read that. I never read that part. If I want to understand what the next chapters will be about, I can look at the table of contents. So the introduction is anyway a difficult task because, again, it will decide whether people will keep following you. So cramming it with too much information is a loss of everyone's time. It doesn't offer you anything, and probably doesn't offer anything to the audience. So this was the first thing that I think I completely gave the wrong advice to my students. I taught them how to play it safe, but when you present, you don't want to play safe. It's better to risk a risk a blooper, or to risk saying something weird or something stupid, rather than to be forgettable. So I set up my students for failure because I taught them, be forgettable, be boring. And again, you can be boring and pass your year 2 university essay, but in the world out there, where there's millions and millions pieces of content and people are constantly have millions of other choices rather than listen to you, you have to do more than just try not to lose. Or another horrible advice, they say, when you give a presentation, just stare at the end of the room and don't have eye contact with anyone, or imagine people being naked, or things like that. All these things are cope. All these things are, I know my presentation is going to suck, so at least I don't want to lose. But not losing when you give a presentation is actually losing. Your presentation either needs to be, people need to remember it, or it won't be at all. So this is about the introduction. You motivate and you show them why they should care. So the tell them part, okay, that's the main part. I haven't got much to say about that. This would be a whole other talk on how to give a presentation. I gave a workshop on good presentations to the members of the Ayn Rand Center UK in the birthday weekend of Ayn Rand Center UK in Edinburgh. If you're a member, you can, I think Razi can give you access to that presentation. Now, let's go to the tell them what you told them part. So this is the part of the conclusion. So this is the second part where usually people go wrong. It's equally important, or almost equally important, with the presentation, because it's the last taste. And what do you people usually do in the conclusion? One of two things, both of which are unsuccessful. The one is they sum up what they said. So people listen again to the same things they have listened, sometimes even in the same words. In this presentation, I told you about this and this and this. Or, even worse, again, I was guilty of that. People thought that when they give a presentation, they will come up with something on the conclusion. So they don't prepare for the conclusion. Or they finish the point and the end is this awkward, well, I guess that was it. Thank you. And I'll take your questions. Counterclimactic. And in a book, I don't remember which book, it said about this concept. I think it was by Pink or something. So that person went to the concept, and the last part of the concept was the singer was carried to the air with some wings on some wire, and looked like she was flying over the stage. You're like, wow, this was the last impression. This was memorable. This is what needs to be done also with a presentation. It has to be memorable. Now, it's good if you remind people what are the main takeaways, but you have to do it in a way which is more than just repeating what you just saw. And also, please leave aside this idea that you will come up with something to end your presentation. You won't. This reminds me, some guys I know who say, I don't know how to fight, but if I ever have to fight on that moment with the adrenaline, I will be a beast. I will see red. No, it's actually going to be the opposite. On that moment, with the adrenaline, you're going to freeze and you're not going to know what to do. Equally in a talk, if you don't have a conclusion, your conclusion is going to suck. Talking from experience, my conclusions are usually the weakest part of my talks. So, how do you make a conclusion memorable? To answer you this question, I will give you an alternative structure to the structure that I've been following, which is the tell them what you tell them what you told them, which is a structure that I found in a book about communication. And it says that what you can do in a talk or in a written piece is 4 things. You either motivate, or you inform/transfer knowledge, or you persuade, or you inspire. So I thought, wait a minute, if you can do these 4 things, and motivate, transform knowledge, persuade, inspire, I thought, how about I use this as my go-to structure? So think about it. What do you do in the introduction? You motivate. You tell them, this is why this topic is relevant to you. So, for example, if I give a talk to a group of students for liberty, freedom is losing. There's some urgency here. Or here's something that you didn't know. So something to trigger their attention. Then you need to inform/transfer knowledge. So, for example, I'm going to talk about capitalism. Why is the things that I'm talking not bullshit? Because I have some facts. And then these facts need to lead to some, like facts and values, as Pikov says, need to lead to some evaluations. So this is the point where I need to persuade you about something. So let's say I give a talk to some random students, not students for liberty. I need to give them the fact that, hey, capitalism has spiked the level of how long we live and how good a life will be. Therefore, it's time for you to change your mind that it's a bad system. Now I try to persuade. And for the end, I try to inspire. I try to leave them with a high note. Now, this is my alternative. So in the beginning, motivate. In the end, try to inspire. Leave them with something positive, something motivating, or something, a call for action or something like that. Now, there's a very thin line between inspiring and being cheesy. And I flirted with falling on the wrong parts of that line. So at some point, maybe if Ayn Rand Center UK gets to 10,000 subscribers, I will read you one day my conclusion from an essay I wrote on sustainable development when I was a pretentious leftist. It's the most cringe thing I've ever read in my life. And unfortunately, I was the one who wrote it. Now, I still think that this was better than just ending by saying, in this essay, I talk about sustainable development, which is sustainable. Thank you. Bye-bye. And as proof of concept, as the importance of a strong conclusion, very quick reminder about how Pikov ends his book. Pikov understands communication really well. So I'm sure even if you've been a bit around the objectivist community, Pikov's conclusions are memorable. So let's take his 3 works very quickly. Opar, the Objectivist, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. What is his conclusion? A chapter called The Duel Between Plato and Aristotle. How can you read 450 pages and then you come to a chapter which is called The Duel Between Plato and Aristotle? This promises adventure. This promises something you want to keep reading. So his conclusion is not summary. No, I'm going to give you something which is even more exciting than the rest of the book. And of course, what are the last lines of the book? Very, very, very memorable. Now you'll say, if it's memorable, why do you have to read them and you don't remember them by heart? But anyway, to save the world is the simplest thing in the world. All one has to do is think. Like, this is a good ending. You read this, it's like, my time reading that book was worth it. Or the ominous parallel. How does Leonard Pikov finish the book? By this great example where he talks about the Constitutional Convention and someone asking this founding father, what type of government are you giving to the people? And he says, a republic, if you can keep it. And then Pikov says, he was not asked what is required to keep it, but the answer to that now would be a philosophy, if you can get one. Again, you read this and it's like, wow, I know why I read this book. I want to return this book. This book will stick with me. Or in the dim hypothesis, not many people have read this book, but even if you haven't read this book, I'm sure you remember or you've heard someone a line that says, the worse the coming future, the more it should motivate its opponents. So these are not literally the last lines of the book, but they are the lines in the conclusion. So learn something from Peikoff. He definitely knows how to finish on a high note. So these were my points. This is why I think that the conventional structure for any piece of work is setting you up for failure, because it's setting you up to be forgettable. And to be forgettable is the worst thing that can happen to you, particularly in today's attention economy. So in terms of good sources on communication. So a book that I found useful is Talk Like TED. It's a book that I literally read within 7 hours. I was in an airport, in a transit. It reads very, very quickly. Quite good advice. Other good books on communication. So this is written by Carmine Gallo. This author has also written a book on breaking down Steve Jobs' presentation. It's called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. Although I think if you read this, you will get the information also, because the Steve Jobs book is earlier. But if you're a Steve Jobs fan, also check The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. Another good book, actually this book is so good that I feel almost bad letting people know about it, because I thought I wanted to be the only one who was read it. It's by a guy called Philip Collins, and it's called The Art of Speeches and Presentations, The Secrets of Making People Remember What You Say. Again, titled The Art of Speeches and Presentations by Philip Collins. He was the guy who was the speechwriter for Tony Blair, so he knows a thing or two about good presentations. I think this is where I got the motivate, transform knowledge, persuade, inspire structure. And another good book is by, this is more old style, by John Maxwell. It's called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. What the most effective people do differently. John Maxwell, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. This is a level entry book on communication. So some of the stuff is a bit old style, but I like it because it pays too much attention on the audience. But if you have to read one book of all these books, I would say The Art of Speeches and Presentations by Philip Collins. But don't suggest this book to leftists or to conservatives. I don't want them to become better at spreading their message. I want only objectivists to have this knowledge. Thank you very much, Robert, for your contribution, and I'm glad you found this useful. So I haven't prepared a conclusion, so I'm not following my own advice, but this was a short episode, as they should be. Don't be forgettable, and this is the way to go. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.